Okay, let's continue with the endocrine system. Where did we leave off? We left off talking about we talked about the role of the antagonistic hormones PTH and calcitonin. So, which one lowers blood calcium levels? Which hormone lowers the amount of calcium in your blood? Sorry? It's not PTH. Because PTH actually, if you look at this chart, PTH gets secreted when there are low levels of blood, low levels of calcium in your blood. So PTH actually raises blood calcium levels. It's calcitonin that lowers it. So we're talking about antagonistic hormones. So what's the antagonist of insulin? What is it? Glucagon? Yeah, glucagon, that's right. We talked about regulation. So we talked about when things fail. Like the idea is that sugar levels go up, insulin gets released, sugar levels come back down, but sometimes there are issues. So what was the problem with Mark? He had a tumor that produced too much what? Too much insulin, and therefore the sugar levels go down too much, and his body ends up going into storage mode. And one of the symptoms we talked about was rapid and pretty significant weight gain. So we were talking about how the system is controlled, the role of the hypothalamus and the pituitary, right? How the hypothalamus controls the pituitary to release things like thyroid stimulating hormone, and that's what we talked about yesterday. We talked about how that's regulated, right? And a goiter, for example, could be due to iodine deficiency, where you can't make T3, T4, and then therefore you don't get that feedback. Okay. I skipped over growth hormone. One of the hormones that comes out of the anterior pituitary is growth hormone. So I want to talk a little bit about that today. Okay. So here's the thing: what would you expect if you had a child who had maybe a benign tumor that was producing not too much insulin, like as in my friend's case, but too much growth hormone? What would you see? Obviously, you would see some pretty dramatic increase in size. So I want to show you this. Now I know that you're told often not to use Wikipedia. Wikipedia is okay. You just got to be careful when you're looking at it. You got to look at their references, okay? So here is Robert Wadlow. Wadlow? I think it's Wadlow. This is a picture of him beside his father. Just to give you an idea of scale, his father is 5'11 and a half. His father is actually taller than me. Okay? Look how much taller he is than his father. Now, what you'll notice is that he had an issue with his pituitary gland, where he had really high levels of human growth hormone. So then I looked further down, right, and I didn't realize that they had all of this information about his actual height at different times in his life. So, like, for example, okay, he seemed pretty normal when he was born, 8 pounds, 6 ounces. It's a little bit big, but it's not nothing abnormal. But then look at the numbers, okay? At a year, he was already 3'6", 45 pounds, okay? At 4 years, he was already an ICA's height, pretty much, right? Taller than most of the girls at this school. By 8 years, he was bigger than me, 6 feet, okay? Just astonishing to think of a kid who, at 6, 7, or 8 years, is taller than, at 6 years of age, is taller than 90% of the girls at the school. Think about that. At 6, okay, is taller than 90%. How tall is Ellen? You guys know Ellen? Ben Weingarten? What is she? About 6? Maybe 6'1"? So, at 8 years of age, he was, or at the very least 9 years of age, he was already Ellen's height. So, then I saw there was a link here, to tallest living person. So I clicked on him, and so he is significantly shorter, but still quite tall, 8'3". And again, notice this thing here. Again, he had a problem with his pituitary gland producing too much growth hormone. Okay, because it makes sense. I mean, growth. Again, I said this yesterday. Don't assume that one hormone controls everything. Like growth is not just a function of the growth hormone. There are other things involved, right? But we can expect that everything else is normal, and you have too much growth hormone, then the person's going to be taller than normal. What if you have? What if the tumor develops though after you stop growing? Oh, hey, and by the way, there's another thing. Let's put another sad story here too about this. You'll notice the age of the Robert when he passed away. Can you see it? He was only 22. Yeah, a lot of these giants do not live very long. I'm assuming it's because it's just very hard on the body to move all that blood around to support something that tall. There's a reason why the average human height is between 5 and 6 feet, right? That big would be very, very demanding. So if you were to Google the list of the tallest people and what age they died, you would notice that they all pretty much died very, very young. Very young. Okay, anyways. So what would happen if the tumor developed after? Because there's a certain point where you don't grow anymore, right? Even if you looked at, well, mind you, Robert did not live very long. But I would imagine that it actually does probably peter out at some point. And he only lived to 22, so it's pretty hard to tell. But there's going to be a point where you just stop growing, right? What happens if the tumor develops after that point? Now you have too much growth hormone, but you stop growing. So what happens in that case? Well, in that case, you don't get bigger, but you get thicker, right? You'll get more muscle. You'll get bigger hands. You'll get bigger face. You'll get bigger bone structure, right? And that's important because if you're an athlete and you want to get bigger, one of the things, now hold on, I'm not saying that you should do this, okay? But I'm saying one of the things that athletes will do, and it's, I believe it's banned in most sports, is to take something like human growth hormone. So you can do like a search of growth hormone in athletes, and you'll get a whole bunch of images that pop. Now, I don't know if all these people are taking human growth hormone, and you can't always rely on what Google gives you. But you'll notice even like people who aren't athletes, like, you recognize this person? You know who that is? That is Sylvester Stallone. So he's actually come out and said he's been taking human growth hormone. If you see him in his 60s, like he's pretty big, he's pretty jacked. So it doesn't make you taller. So whether you have a tumor that's producing too much growth hormone or you're taking it synthetically, that's the same thing, right? Now in this case, if you're taking it when you're 30 or 40 or 50, you're not going to get taller, but you will get bigger. Okay, you will get bigger. All right. So then what do you think would happen if there was a deficiency in the tumor? Not in the tumor. A deficiency in growth hormone. Right. You would expect on average to be smaller. So as a therapy, what could you prescribe? If you have a child and you notice that the growth hormone levels are low, you can prescribe growth hormone. I don't know if it's covered. I know in the States that you could get it and you could pay for it, and it's like thousands and thousands of dollars per year. I don't know if it's covered in Canada. Okay. All right. Now, let's talk. Oh, yes. Let's talk about the adrenal glands. Okay. Yeah, let's talk about the adrenal glands. Because we talked a little bit about the adrenal glands with osmoregulation, right? We talked about how they release aldosterone to control salt levels, right? So let's go back to the adrenal glands because it's part of the endocrine system. So how are the adrenal glands controlled? Take a look at this chart. This chart looks exactly the same as the chart you saw with the thyroid gland. Basically, you have the hypothalamus over here that controls the pituitary gland over here, which then controls the adrenal gland over here. And then what you see is a feedback, right? So how does it work? Well, the hypothalamus controls the anterior pituitary through a releasing hormone. The anterior pituitary then responds by releasing. Okay. Oh, word of warning. In the previous diagram I showed you, this side over here, this was the anterior side. Okay? But in this diagram, this is the anterior side. It's just flipped. Okay? So this is the anterior side on this side, okay? And this then therefore is the posterior side. In the other diagram, it was the other way around, okay? So the hypothalamus secretes CRH, which is a releasing hormone, which triggers the release of ACTH, also known as corticotropin, which then targets the adrenal glands. And one of the things the adrenal glands release is cortisol. Okay? And you can see, when you have high levels of cortisol, what happens? Well, you get a feedback effect. Okay? And that makes sense because, okay, you have the release of a chemical. You don't want to keep releasing it. Now, I'll tell you what cortisol does. Cortisol has several effects. One of the things that it does is it raises sugar levels. Okay? It's one of the stress hormones because in a stress response, which we'll talk about very soon, in a stress response, we talked about you want more what? You want more sugar because you need to deal with something, right? So you need the energy. I want to show you this little chart here, and I want to see if you can figure out something, okay? Because one of the things I want you to understand is how this thing is regulated, but also when issues pop up, can you explain the issue, okay? So this chemical over here, ACTH, okay? ACTH, you can see, is right here. So it's involved in the release of cortisol, okay? One of the symptoms you might get if a person has too much ACTH, okay? Maybe there's a tumor that's producing not enough, because you guys know what a tumor is, right? A tumor is what? Right, it's an abnormal growth of cells, right? You have a collection of these cells. And here's the thing, if you have a tumor in your beta cells, you're producing too much insulin. If you have a tumor in your alpha cells in the pancreas, you produce too much glucagon. It always depends where the tumor is. If you have a tumor in the pituitary gland, well, you saw the pituitary gland releases a whole bunch of hormones, right? So if it could be too much growth hormone, but what if it's too much ACTH? Okay? What if it's too much ACTH? Then what would happen? Well, one of the symptoms that you might notice if you're producing too much ACTH is you might notice a darkening of the skin. Okay? Now, you're like, why would that? Well, here's the thing about ACTH. You'll notice that ACTH, so this here is a chemical that you can see becomes different things. So the body converts them into different things, including ACTH. Now, the ACTH then becomes converted into different things. One of them is this, which is alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone. Now, do you know what a melanocyte stimulating hormone is? Or is it? It might be melanin stimulating hormone. It's either I can't remember now. It's either melanocyte stimulating hormone or melanin stimulating hormone. But the key is the word melanin. What's melanin? Where have we heard that before? Where have we heard it before? Or maybe you've heard suntan. What happens when you suntan? What happens when you suntan? You go in the sun, your skin gets darker. Why does it get darker? But why? What's going on? What is actually going on? Your body starts producing more what? Melanin. Okay? Now, why does it do that? Because the melanin will protect your skin against the sun. So the darker skin is actually protection against the radiation from the sun. Your body will naturally start making that in response to ultraviolet radiation. Here's the thing though. If you have too much of this, it will promote more of that melanin. So one of the symptoms if there's an issue and a person is producing too much ACTH, you may see darkening of skin. Yeah, you may. When you what? You've overexposed your skin to the ultraviolet radiation. Because the melanin can protect you to an extent, right? But then, if you are sitting in the sun for too long, then you've kind of fried yourself a little bit. Yeah. Do you burn easily? Yeah. It's because you have light skin, right? It's because you have light skin. So by the time, it's not like your body will produce the melanin right away. It takes time to make melanin to protect you, right? So you'll burn before that happens. Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about cortisol. Okay? A little bit about cortisol. I'm going to show you this little flow chart. Looks quite complicated, doesn't it? So here are, some of the things that cortisol does. Cortisol, so you can see in this chart, cortisol here has a positive effect on the liver, and that will raise blood glucose levels. You can see cortisol is triggered it comes from the pituitary, it doesn't come from the pituitary gland. It is triggered in response to, there's ACTH. Okay, this is the ACTH, also known as corticotropin. Okay, there's the ACTH. And you can see that has a positive effect on the adrenal cortex, which releases cortisol. Cortisol also has a negative effect on macrophages. Now, do you know what a macrophage is? Do you know what part? It's part of a system that we'll be studying in the future. Macrophage is a cell that belongs to what system? Yeah, Charlotte, very good. The immune system. Okay? So you can see that actually cortisol has a negative effect on your immune system. So it has a positive effect on increasing sugar levels, but it has a negative effect on your immune system. Okay? So far, so good? Okay. What if you have low cortisol? Where could the problem be if you have not enough cortisol? Where could it be? Think about that for a second. Think about the way that this is regulated. You have a patient that comes to you, okay, and you measure the cortisol levels and they're low. Where could the problem be? So it could be the brain, because if the brain is not secreting enough ACTH, then you don't get, because the ACTH controls the cortisol, right? So that's one scenario. Or maybe this, CRH. But again, that's the problem is either the brain or the problem is what else? Right. Or the adrenal glands, right? Maybe the problem is the adrenal gland. So, how do you know? What could you do? Well, one thing you could do is this. You can give your patient an injection, a synthetic injection of ACTH, okay? Let's say we give them an injection of ACTH, and the cortisol levels don't change, okay? They don't change. What does that tell you? What could that be telling you? Where? So you give them ACTH, you give them this, it's probably suggesting there's something wrong with the adrenal glands, okay? Because you've given them the ACTH and the adrenal gland did not respond to it, probably you have an issue here with the adrenal gland, okay? When you have low levels of cortisol, the condition is called Addison's disease. Okay? Now, if you have the opposite, if you have high levels of cortisol, the condition is called Cushing's disease, and this actually is a picture of someone with Cushing's disease. One of the things that happen in Cushing's disease, you get like this, and I'm not sure why you get it. I really should look into it. You get like this redness around the face. You get fat deposition, so you start to increase weight. Start to see an increase in weight, especially around the belly and the face. Okay, so let's say a patient has too much cortisol. What could the problem be? Again, we have the same issue, right? The problem could be the brain is producing too much ACTH, or the adrenal gland is producing too much cortisol in response to the ACTH. What could we do? Again, what I'm painting to you is a very simple picture. There's obviously a lot more that goes into this, but what could you do? So one thing you can do is you can give them what's called a dexamethasone test. Okay. Now, I want you to look at I'm recording something. Okay. Okay. So I want you to look at dexamethasone. Okay. Look at the structure of dexamethasone. What do you notice it looks like? And there's a picture beside it. I purposely put the other hormone beside it. What does it look like? It looks almost identical to what? Okay, cortisol, right? Now, here's the thing about cortisol. What does high levels of cortisol do to the brain? According to this chart, cortisol will have what kind of feedback in the brain? Negative feedback, yeah, very good, okay? So, what you could do is you could give your patient comes to you who has really high levels of cortisol. So you give them a dexamethasone test, right? Now, you would expect that because dexamethasone looks like cortisol, that it would have what kind of an effect on the brain? Very good. It would have a negative effect on the brain, right? So let's imagine you give them the dexamethasone test, and the cortisol levels go down. Okay? Cortisol levels go down. What does that tell you? Is that? Sorry, I can't hear you. Okay, how about we do it this way? Let's flip it around. What if you give them an injection of dexamethasone and nothing happens? the cortisol levels stay high. What could that tell you? What's supposed to happen? What's that? Where? In the brain. But nothing happens. So where's the problem then? Most likely it's going to be in the brain. Okay? So these are just a couple of tests that, I mean, again, we're not a doctor. It's obviously way more complicated than this, but just to give you an idea of how regulation, how this system works, right? Okay. Let's talk about the stress response. And this is the last thing we'll talk about, okay? Because the adrenal glands play a very important role in the stress response. So here is a flow chart of the stress response. And you can see on the right, you'll notice there is the adrenal gland, right? And you can see the levels of regulation. You can see here that we have, here's your hypothalamus. Here's that releasing hormone. Here's ACTH, which is also known as corticotropin. Here is cortisol. And you'll notice the effects of cortisol, right? Look at what cortisol does. Okay? It mobilizes fat. Because if you mobilize stuff, you could use it for fuel. Instead of storing it, you're moving it around the body to burn it. You could move amino acids into the liver, because then what we could do with the amino acids is we can convert it into glucose. And we could raise sugar levels. In the stress response, we talked about this, right? What do you want? You want more sugar. Okay? One of the side effects, though, and we talked about this before, cortisol has a negative effect on your immune system. So it will actually inhibit things like an allergic reaction. So it has a negative effect on your immune system. So here's the thing then. We could expect a patient who has high levels of cortisol to, on average, if everything else is equal, to maybe come to you more often with illnesses. Why? Right, because cortisol is having a negative effect on your immune system, and your immune system keeps you from being ill. So you might expect, you go through the history of your patient, she's always coming to me with something, right? Maybe something's going on there. On the left side is the role of the nervous system. So this is the endocrine system on the right, but the nervous system and the endocrine system, they work very close together, right? And you can see that they're actually connected. So the nervous system controls the endocrine system, and you can see that on the right side, but it's also directly involved on the left side. And we'll talk more about the nervous system later on, but you can see here, one of the things that it does is it releases adrenaline. Now, you notice that the adrenal glands are also divided into two parts, which I believe, pretty sure I showed you. So here is the cortex on the outside, and the inside is the medulla, just like the kidney. Remember the outer part of the kidney is called the cortex, and the inner part is the medulla? It's the same organization here. The outer part is controlled by hormones. The inner part is controlled by this nerve connection to what are called the sympathetic nerves, which we will talk about in the next chapter, okay? When adrenaline is released, here are some of the effects, okay? Again, you'll notice over here, conversion of glycogen to glucose to raise sugar levels, because we want more sugar. But in a stress response, and again, a stress response could be playing a soccer game, going on a first date, an exam, being chased by a hungry lion or dog. What else do you want? You don't just want high sugar levels. You also want what? Heart rate to go up, And you can see the epinephrine has an effect on the heart. It increases the cardiac output by making the heart beat faster. It also dilates certain blood vessels, and you saw that when we looked at the effects of adrenaline on two different types of blood vessels. Some will dilate and get bigger, and some will get smaller. We want to dilate blood vessels that are going into muscles because we can run faster or harder. But why the brain? Why do you want to send more blood to your brain? Because you got to think. You have to think. You have to think more clearly. Certain things will get less blood flow, like the skin, the kidneys, the digestive system. Okay? It's really not that important that you digest that hamburger you just ate. It's more important that you send more blood to your muscles in your legs and your arms so you can run faster or harder and you can fight better. Or more to your brain so you can think more clearly. But then we talked about a problem here because initially you're going to want to send less blood to your skin. That way if there's an injury, you have less loss of blood. But what happens over time is that you start to overheat. In a stress response, if you're fighting, running, whatever, you're going to start to overheat. And then you're going to have to send more blood to your skin because of thermal regulation, right? You're going to overheat otherwise. This on the left, we will talk about how the nervous system works. So right now you're like, okay, what, it says here, it says lowers the threshold in RAS. I'll just explain that really quickly. What that means, we'll talk more about this in the next chapter. This means it just makes the brain more sensitive, more aware of things. Okay? Lowering the threshold in the nervous system means that the nervous system is just more sensitive. It will detect things more easily. Okay? So this is the stress response. So you can see classic regulation. You can see it involves many, many parts. Okay? So it's a neat little example of like all of these parts, all of these chemicals working together to, in this case, to raise sugar levels, raise blood pressure, raise cardiac output. Okay, ladies? So that's it for today. What we'll do, here's a picture of the adrenal gland. What we'll do next time, and we'll only have a little bit left, is talk about your reproductive system. Again, another good example of regulation with the reproductive hormones. Okay, ladies? So that is it.